In the history of textiles, Dacca muslin is one of the most mysterious and amazing fabrics ever made. Think of a fabric that was so incredibly fine and delicate that it was given poetic names like woven air and evening dew. This wasn't a myth or a fantasy. It was a real thing that came from the fertile land and skilled hands of Bengal, especially around the city of Dhaka in what is now Bangladesh. For hundreds of years, this legendary fabric wasn't just a luxury item, it was a worldwide trend that the most powerful and important people on every continent wore. Its story is one of human ingenuity that has never been seen before, a rich cultural heritage and a terrible planned loss that still affects people today. To really understand how amazing Dacca muslin is, think about how it's made. There are historical accounts that are so thin that a bolt of 300 feet could be pulled through a wedding ring. These accounts are often so unbelievable that they sound like they could not be true. One story says that a piece 60 feet long could be folded up and put in a pocket snuff box. These aren't just exaggerations. They show a truth that the world's textiles haven't been able to explain for hundreds of years. That airy feel came from a special kind of cotton called Gossypium arboreum var. In the area they are called Phuti Karpas neglecta. The long, thin fibres of Gossypium hirsutum make up 90% of today's global cotton production. This cotton, on the other hand, made short, stumpy threads that were easy to fray. That thing that seemed like a bad thing about it was actually the key to how fine it was. Through thousands of years of careful practice and passing on knowledge, the local weavers came up with a 16-step process to tame these delicate fibres and turn them into yarn that is unbelievably fine. Different villages often took turns doing different parts of this complicated process. It was a real community effort that involved men, women, children, and the elderly all working together in harmony with nature and tradition. As an example, spinning was often done on boats in the early mornings and late afternoons when it was humid, because that's when the fibres could stretch without snapping. Older weavers, whose eyesight may have gotten worse over time, couldn't even see the threads, which shows how precise the work had to be. But the story of Dacca muslin isn't just one of ancient victory. It's also a sad story of decline and planned destruction. As the 18th century went on, the British East India Company, which was hungry for economic power, set its sights on the lucrative textile trade. They knew that Dacca muslin had the best quality and was in high demand around the world, but instead of competing on quality, they chose to suppress it in a planned way. The story that British agents cut off weavers' thumbs to stop them from making muslin is often told, but it is mostly believed to be made up to make the story more dramatic. The truth is much more sinister. The economic and political tactics used were meant to break down the industry from the inside. Heavy taxes were put on Dacca muslin, which made it too expensive for both makers and buyers. Weavers were often put in debt and had to sell their goods to the East India Company at artificially low prices. If they tried to sell to other merchants, they were punished severely. Along with this economic strangulation, British-made cotton goods were actively promoted. These goods were of lower quality, but were cheaper and easier to find because of industrialization. The goal was clear: to get rid of all the other textile companies and provide British textiles with a monopoly. It had a terrible effect on the weavers and the area. As jobs disappeared, generations of specialized knowledge that had been passed down through families started to be lost. The Phuti Karpas cotton plant, which was once carefully grown, slowly went away and eventually died out in its natural environment. The industry that used to be very successful, in 1747, cotton goods, mostly muslin from Dhaka, were worth 28.6 lakh rupees, was slowly broken down. This wasn't just a loss for business, it was also a tragedy for culture, as an art form that had defined a region for thousands of years was erased on purpose. In their never-ending quest for profit, the British cut off an important link to Bengal's rich history, leaving a hole that would take hundreds of years to fill. But Dacca muslin's spirit was never completely put out, even though it was pushed down. A strong desire to recover this lost heritage has led to an amazing comeback in the last few years. Scientists and textile fans are working together to figure out what the ancient fabric is all about using cutting-edge methods. Nanotechnology is being used to study pieces of Dacca muslin that have been preserved in museums. This shows amazing details about the structure of its fibers and even hints that it may have contained other materials like microscopic gold particles or lotus fibers that gave it its unique properties. Researchers are still trying to find solid proof that gold or lotus fibers were woven into the fabric on purpose. But the fact that this is even a possibility shows how well these ancient artisans knew how to work with materials. The Phuti Karpas cotton plant has been found and grown again, which is one of the most important steps forward in the revival effort. A 70% match was found in an unkempt bush along the Meghna River after a lot of research and genetic sequencing of samples that were kept from the 1800s. Test seeds were planted in 2015, and that same year the first crop of cotton was picked. Even though it's still hard to make 100% authentic Dacca muslin, the progress is clear. Current efforts are making hybrid threads. Master weavers like Alamin are now trying to recreate the exact conditions and tools needed for the delicate spinning and weaving process. They're even making do with tools like the shana, which is a piece of bamboo with thousands of fake teeth that is used to hold the thread in place. To bring back Dacca muslin is more than just an attempt to make a fabric again. It's a powerful act of reclaiming culture. It's a way to honor the people who came before, whose skills and art were almost lost to colonial ambition. It shows how strong people are and how powerful heritage can be over time. The story of Dacca muslin shows that real value is not just making money, but also keeping knowledge, art, and the unique things that each culture brings to the human story alive. It makes us think about the hidden costs of unchecked power and how important it is to honor and protect different traditions. Let's talk more about how Dacca muslin's fineness is just not possible. Imagine a fabric that is so airy and light that a sari made from it could fit in a matchbox. This wasn't just a poetic flourish. Historical records and museum displays show how delicate it really was. For example, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London has Dacca muslin pieces that still amaze textile experts with how thin they are. For Dacca muslin, the thread count, which is the number of threads per square inch, ranged from crazy high 800 to 1200. To give you an idea of how big this number is, most high-quality cotton fabrics today, even the most expensive ones, don't have thread counts higher than 400. A bedsheet might have a thread count of 200 to 300 as an example. In other words, Dacca muslin was at least 3 to 4 times finer than what we normally see, and it was fully made by hand. It was an art form in and of itself to grow Phuti Karpas cotton. This one-of-a-kind plant, which grows only in the alluvial soil of the Meghna River basin, made short staple fibres that were very hard to spin. While long staple cotton is easy for machines to work with, Phuti Karpas needed to be handled carefully and with a deep knowledge of how it behaves. The air's humidity, temperature, and even the time of day were all very important to the process. Women, often from a very young age, would use simple spindles to spin the fibres. Their quick fingers could feel even the smallest changes in the thread, making sure it was strong and uniform. This wasn't just a job, it was a skill that had been passed down from mother to daughter for hundreds of years, and had been perfected. In our fast-paced world, it's hard to imagine how much hard work and patience are needed just for this stage. The process of weaving, called Jamdani, was just as complicated. Instead of embroidering patterns on top of the fabric, this method involved weaving them into it. The designs, which were often based on natural things like peacocks, flowers, or geometric shapes, were so well put together that they looked like they were floating on top of the clear fabric. 2 weavers had to work together on a traditional pit loom to make this happen. One weaved the main fabric, and the other added the extra weft threads that made up the patterns. The process was very slow, very careful, and needed to be done exactly right. Based on how complicated the design is, making a single Jamdani sari could take months or even a year. The value of these finished goods was huge. Records from the past show that 1 yard of Dacca muslin could sell for between £7,000 and £56,000 today. This makes it much more expensive than even the best silks of the time. It was planned economic warfare on the part of the British East India Company to destroy the Dacca muslin industry piece by piece. Because of the Industrial Revolution, the British textile industry was making more cotton goods than ever before. But honestly, they were just not as good as Dacca muslin. The East India Company put in place a set of unfair rules to get rid of this competition. They put ridiculously high taxes on Dacca muslin that was exported, which made it, well, basically useless on world markets. At the same time, they flooded the Indian market with cheap British textiles that were made on machines, which really hurt local production. Weavers were often forced to sign contracts with the East India Company that tied them to that company. These contracts said that they had to sell their goods for very little money, often less than what it cost to make them. Those who refused were punished severely, with physical violence and the destruction of their looms being 2 examples. Because the weaving communities were taken advantage of economically, there was a lot of poverty and hunger, and many people had to give up their traditional craft and look for other ways to make a living. The weaving villages that used to be full of life became empty, and the specialized knowledge that was once a source of great pride and wealth started to become lost. This policy of colonialism had effects beyond ruining the economy. It was also an act of suppressing culture on purpose. India's economy used to be self-sufficient, but the British wanted to change it so that it would supply raw materials to British factories and sell British-made goods. One great example of this strategy was the end of the Dacca Muslin industry. It wasn't just about controlling trade, it was also about showing power and getting rid of a sign of Indian independence and excellence. Because of this systemic oppression, the Phuti Karpas cotton plant, which had been grown for thousands of years, was lost. Since there wasn't a market for Dacca muslin, farmers didn't have any reason to grow this delicate and difficult crop, and it eventually died out. This loss of lands and cultures is a stark reminder of how colonial exploitation had far-reaching effects. But Dacca Muslin's story is more than just a tragedy. It shows how strong the human spirit is and how cultural heritage can last for a long time. The work being done to bring this lost art back to life is a powerful response to the wrongs done in the past. Because the Bangladeshi government knows how important Dacca muslin is to culture, it has actively supported research and efforts to bring it back to life. To bring back Phuti Karpas cotton, a team of dedicated researchers and botanists carefully analysed the genes of dried plant samples kept in botanical gardens. This helped them find a closely related wild variety. When combined with the traditional knowledge of living Jamdani weavers, this scientific project is a one-of-a-kind mix of modern science and ancient wisdom. The efforts to bring about revival are not without problems. To grow Phuti Karpas in the right conditions and learn the 16-step process of spinning and weaving, you need to put in a lot of time and effort. At the moment, the goal is to reach 300 threads, which is still a lot less than the historical 800 to 1200 threads, but still an amazing accomplishment. This ongoing journey shows how important it is to keep alive traditional crafts and indigenous knowledge, not just because they are valuable economically, but also because they are important culturally and historically. This is a strong statement about reclaiming who you are and honouring a heritage that was almost lost to time. When things look bad, the Dacca Muslin paradox shows us that history can be rewritten and forgotten. Brilliance can shine again, even when the odds are very high. In addition to being a work of art, Dacca muslin had deep cultural and symbolic meanings. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a sign of wealth, power, and good taste. The luxurious lifestyles of the Mughal emperors made them especially fond of Dacca muslin. It is said that Emperor Aurangzeb once scolded his daughter for going out in public naked, only to find out that she was wearing 7 layers of Dacca muslin. This story, which may be a bit embellished, vividly shows how clear the fabric was and just how amazed people were by it. People in royal houses across Europe, not just in the Mughal court, wanted Dacca muslin. Queen Marie Antoinette of France and Napoleon's first wife, Empress Josephine Bonaparte, were 2 of its biggest fans and wore it as part of their high-fashion wardrobes. In the West, the fabric became a sign of class and elegance, which made it even more popular around the world. Not only did Dacca muslin have an ethereal quality that made it mysterious, but it also had a mysterious history and was made in a mysterious way. Customers from the West couldn't understand how such a delicate fabric could be made by humans, so they thought it was made by mythical creatures like mermaids, fairies, or even ghosts. Some people thought it was woven underwater, which made it even more mysterious. Even though these explanations aren't true, they add to the sense of wonder and disbelief that Dacca muslin created. The product was so far ahead of its time that it almost seemed like magic. This air of mystery made it even more valuable and sought after, making it an item that people wanted for hundreds of years. It was a calculated act of economic and cultural imperialism on the part of the British East India Company to destroy this industry. Even though Britain's textile industry was becoming more industrialised quickly, it was never as fine or high quality as Dacca muslin. Instead of encouraging fair competition, they used threats to get what they wanted. In order to protect their new textile industry, Britain passed the infamous Calico Acts in the early 18th century. These laws said that finished cotton goods from India, like muslin, could not be brought into the country. After this, Bengal went through a series of harsh actions. Weavers were forced to work and were only allowed to sell their goods to the East India Company. They were often paid very little for their beautiful work. People who dared to break these rules were punished severely, with cuts and jail time being common. Their looms were also destroyed. There is some disagreement about the historical claim that many people had their thumbs cut off, but it is clear that the weavers were hurt financially and physically, and it was terrible. This kind of systematic oppression had a lot of negative effects. Bengal's weaving communities, which used to be very successful, were wiped out. Many weavers lost their social and economic standing when they couldn't support their families and had to give up their ancestral craft to work in other fields, usually farming. As the business of weaving Dacca muslin stopped making money, the specialized knowledge that had been passed down from generation to generation started to disappear. The Phuti Karpas cotton plant, which needed special growing methods and was an important part of what made muslin special, slowly disappeared from the landscape because it wasn't being grown or bought. This loss of native knowledge and biodiversity was caused by colonial policies that tried to control the world textile trade. This journey of revival is a sign of hope, because it shows that cultural heritage can be brought back to life even after hundreds of years of being hidden away. It shows how important it is to understand and respect traditional knowledge systems, which often hold answers and ideas that modern science is just starting to find. The Dacca Muslin paradox is a strong reminder of how history, culture, the economy and the environment are all linked. It makes us think about what unchecked industrialization and colonial ambition really cost, and it makes us realize how important it is to keep different cultural expressions alive. People used to think that the threads of Dacca Muslin were lost forever, but they are slowly being rewoven. This shows that a country is determined to take back its history and make a new future. If this complicated story of forgotten genius and determined revival strikes a chord with you, please consider liking this video to show your support. Your participation helps us share more stories like these that are interesting and aren't told enough with a wider audience. Send this video to family, friends, or anyone else who likes history, craftsmanship, or the creative spirit that lives on in people. Subscribe to Universal Insights to learn more about the mysteries of life and the universe, as well as the hidden stories that shape our world. And as always, we invite your thoughts. What other forgotten histories or lost arts do you believe deserve to be brought back into the light? Share your insights and questions in the comments below. Your ideas and thoughts are very important to our community.